With the world's most high-profile climate crisis denier as one of the main speakers, this year's World Economic Forum in the snowy Swiss town of Davos focused on mitigating the damage of global heating.
How do I reconcile with the ones who just don't believe in climate change, who say it is a matter of belief? For me, it is a typical matter of very clear scientific data based on evidence. This could be the greatest task of our society.
I think they said 99 panels about sustainability and the environment and the climate, and they're really proud about that. But I do think that it is a lot of talk and not enough action.
World leaders and corporate bosses say they are committed to making sharp cuts in carbon emissions. For instance, the European Union outlined plans to spend more than $1 trillion to speed up the shift away from the continent's reliance on fossil fuels. A coalition of international financial institutions also pledged to take steps to minimize carbon-heavy investments. And 140 of the world's largest corporations agreed to include climate-related goals in how they measure their own performance. Even President Donald Trump, who pulled the US out of the Paris Climate Accord, was caught up in it, pledging to join the forum's massive reforestation project.
The United States will join 1 Trillion Trees initiative being launched here at the World Economic Forum. 1 trillion trees.
But teen activist Greta Thunberg says it's still not enough and is calling on policymakers to follow through on their promises.
We're not telling you to offset your emissions by just paying someone else to plant trees in places like Africa, while at the same time forests like the Amazon are being slaughtered at an infinitely higher rate. Planting trees is good, of course, but it's nowhere near enough of what is needed.
Despite the event's focus on the climate, there is still a clear disconnect between activists and the business sector. In its latest global risk report, the WEF listed environmental hazards as the top threats to the global economy. But a survey of corporate executives about the 10 biggest risks to their businesses made no mention of the climate crisis. Tayyibe Aydin, TRT World.
Now let's go to Shane Hahm, who's been covering the event for us in Davos. Good to have you back with us, Shane. So the annual gathering of the rich and powerful is over for another year. Just tell us, what were the highlights of this year's World Economic Forum Summit?
Well, as the theme of this year's event suggests, stakeholders for a more cohesive and sustainable world. The environment and climate change was top billing in that report. You just heard there that top 5 main issues for the World Economic Forum heading in was all related to the environment. Now, you had some of the world's richest and most powerful people and government leaders all gathered here, and now the issue is how to translate these, now that we have acknowledged that climate change is a threat to the well-being and to the world we live in, how that translates to the corporate world and how governments can take action and what the incentives are to follow through on these actions. That's where we saw progress at this year's event. That was probably the main highlight. And of course, other issues dealing with the global economy, including the increasing income gap between rich and poor, also the fourth industrial revolution and the way work is being defined through automation and with artificial intelligence already at our doorstep, how that transition is going to be made for workers around the world.
Now, teenage climate activist Greta Thunberg was undoubtedly the star of this year's World Economic Forum. How did the delegates there react to her message, many of whom have made their billions through, I guess, energy-intensive industries?
That is the irony, isn't it? Well, Greta Thunberg, if last year was her big coming out onto the global stage, this year she really solidified her position as a climate activist and a force to be reckoned with. In fact, when she arrived here, she arrived not just by herself, but with a legion of fellow youth activists for the climate. traveling here by non-conventional means to show what needs to be done. And global leaders have, in fact, reacted. Those that believe in her beliefs. Specifically, one example would be German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who had said that she herself is in her mid-60s, but she understands what she needs to do to help youngsters like Greta Thunberg and other young folks that will namely be here on the earth longer than many other people, what needs to be done for that future generation. And now that world leaders are coming around to this idea that somehow corporations and governments need to be held accountable, that's really the big step that we took. And Greta Thunberg, of course, played a major role in that.
Okay, Shane Hahm, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much for covering Davos for us in Switzerland this week.